Like a wave rolling across America, the changes came. Sometimes surprising, often shocking. By 1970,
Rap singer Eazy-E has lost his battle with AIDS just 10 days after revealing that he had the disease.
So many friends who I have lost to HIV/AIDS. So many.
In the 1980s, the name HIV/AIDS was a death sentence, especially if you were a black gay man. They were considered unclean, outcasts, and when they died, their names were erased from public memory. One man, once hailed as the golden voice of the decade, died with only a nurse holding his hand in his final moments. Another, a 1970s funk icon, was turned away by his colleagues, disowned by his family, and smeared by the media as a social worm. But that's just the surface. There are more heartbreaking, more painful stories behind the scenes about 23 black gay R&B singers who died of HIV/AIDS that you've never heard. And if your heart aches for justice, leave a comment. 23. Keith Barrow, the cursed prince of disco. He set the dance floor on fire. But in his later years, Keith Barrow's voice slowly disappeared from the airwaves, as if he had never existed. The son of famed civil rights minister Willie Barrow, Keith was the great hope of disco box soul music. Best known for his hit, You Know You Want to Be Loved. But in 1982, as he was preparing to release a new album, he abruptly canceled all his concerts, citing exhaustion. The press began to wonder a singer at the peak of his career, suddenly disappearing. Then came rumors of Keith's mysterious illness, a disease the media didn't even dare to name. A close friend recalled the first time Keith suspected he had HIV. It was an afternoon in his Chicago apartment. Keith had lost nearly 10 pounds in just 1 month. He had a dry cough when he sang, and he was tired for no apparent reason. But what frightened him most were the purple sores that began to appear on his legs. A dermatologist looked at it and said quietly, "We should check it out, but I think it's Kaposi's sarcoma." Keith understood. He knew what it was and what it meant to him. A gay man. In the 80s, he cried, then laughed. What could be more tragic than someone who lived by his voice, getting a disease that would keep him silent for the rest of his life? Keith's mother, Reverend Barrow, was the only person by his side during his final months. But even she felt pressure from the black church community, who didn't want to be associated with a gay man who died of AIDS. When Keith died in 1983, the funeral was kept low-key. No R&B stars attended, not a single condolence in the major newspapers. Some say that because Keith's family was so prominent in the civil rights movement, they kept quiet to protect their reputation. But for those who heard Keith sing, they knew that a talent had gone without a goodbye. Some people die not because of illness, but because society doesn't give them the chance to live their true lives. Keith Barrow's story is not just a death, it's a reminder that those who dare to love in silence deserve to be remembered in the light. 22. Wayne Cooper, the voice strangled in the dark. Wayne Cooper was the soulful voice of the famous funk band Cameo. But to this day, there are still thousands of people who don't know his face in every Cameo hit, like Shake Your Pants or Why Have I Lost You. That mesmerizing high-pitched voice belongs to Wayne. Yet, he never topped the album cover. He was just a permanent background vocalist, even when he outshone the lead singer. In 1983, as the group was planning a national tour, Wayne abruptly withdrew because he was not feeling well. But a backstage crew member saw him coughing violently in the dressing room, accompanied by an unusual purple rash on his neck. Wayne's secret boyfriend, an anonymous photographer, said that Wayne first realized he was HIV positive during a photo shoot. He collapsed in the middle of the set, dizzy and feverish. No one suspected anything at the time, but when the blood results came back, he was speechless. In his private diary, Wayne wrote, "If I go public with my illness, I will be kicked out of the group. If I keep quiet, I will die alone." In the end, he chose to disappear. No announcement, no farewell to the audience. Wayne died in 1984. No TV news coverage, no memorial service from Cameo. Fans only knew that he left the group for personal reasons. It was not until many years later, when a former band member let slip in an interview, that the truth was revealed. Wayne Cooper died of AIDS and was asked to keep it a secret so as not to affect the reputation of the band. A nameless, soundless, unrecorded death because he loved the wrong person at the wrong time. Wayne's voice once touched many hearts, but his heart was broken by the fear of not being recognized. It was the tragedy of a talent buried by discrimination and a warning about the value of true life. 21. Franklin Seals, the man who disappeared from Hollywood. When talking about the sitcom Silver Spoons, audiences remember the bright smile of Franklin Seals, who played Dexter Stuffins. As a rare black actor who had a place in the sitcom in the 80s, Franklin was once considered a symbol of the new generation of actors, funny, smart, and charming. But few people know that behind that smile was a silent storm. A co-star in the film crew said he started coming to work late, losing weight quickly, often being absent-minded and falling asleep in the middle of the scene. People thought he was stressed, but Franklin knew his body was betraying him. One day, while filming in the middle of the set, he collapsed and was taken to the emergency room. The medical report at that time did not specify the reason, but an old nurse recounted that the blood test had a code that marked HIV+. But everything was kept secret. Franklin was scared as a gay man. He knew his illness would end his career. He began refusing interviews, cutting off contact with the media, and living in the shadows. Franklin died in 1990 at the age of 37. There was no Hollywood tribute. No one acknowledged that he died of AIDS. The death certificate simply listed natural causes. But to those who knew the truth, it was deliberate oblivion. A death was hidden to protect the image of an industry that was not ready to accept gay people of color. Franklin was not just a talented actor, he was also a victim of silence. Silence from society, from the entertainment industry, and even from those who worked with him. But those who saw that smile on the small screen still remember, and they deserve to know the truth. 20. Keith Christopher, the multi-talented angel who collapsed on Broadway. He was the embodiment of a well-rounded artist-singer, songwriter, stage actor, LGBTQ+ activist. But Keith Christopher was not known to the world as a star, but as a shadow that history hastily dismissed. He had starred in the musical The Life on Broadway, his voice warm and thick as leather, his eyes always shining with calm. But in 1996, while preparing for a big show, Keith suddenly quit. A colleague recalled he often had a fever, a persistent dry cough, and complained that he felt like his body was fighting with itself. No one thought the worst. No one expected it to be goodbye. The story of his diagnosis began with a small accident. Keith suffered a minor scratch while carrying a prop. The wound seemed harmless, but after a few days, it became seriously infected. The doctor ordered a full blood test. A few weeks later, Keith received the results in a small clinic in Harlem. No one witnessed the conversation, but a few days later, he disappeared from all schedules. A close friend in the theater world later recalled, "I received a letter from Keith. Just a few lines. If it ends here, remember that I never regretted having loved, even if it was in the dark." Keith died in 1998 at the age of 40. His death received only a few lines in the local newspaper. There was no memorial, no honor. Rumor has it that the theater that booked him to perform refused to accept a portrait because it didn't want to cause controversy. But years later, those who saw him perform said, when Keith sang, the whole house stopped breathing. They never forgot. Keith's death was not only a loss to art, but also proof that silence kills faster than disease. We can't turn back time, but we can tell it again, so that those forgotten songs can live once more in truth. 19. Blackberry, the wandering soul of a man who lived true to the end. He never hid, from his meditative voice to his socially candid gaze. Blackberry was an unlikely icon, a musical warrior, an uncompromising LGBTQ+ activist, and one of the first black artists to openly admit that he was HIV positive without a bow. But there was a part of his life that history forgot, the years he fought a silent battle with a disease that no one wanted to touch. In 1986, while performing in San Francisco, Blackberry collapsed mid-set. People thought he was exhausted, but the truth was more brutal. Blackberry learned he was HIV positive after donating blood to a community health center. The doctor called him aside, his eyes heavy. "You react HTLV3." The doctor said a term that was unfamiliar at the time. But Blackberry understood. He had heard his friends gasp, seen many in the LGBTQ+ community fall one by one. But instead of staying silent, he chose to act. He organized charity concerts, sang during HIV conferences, and held the microphone at memorials for victims no one mentioned. In his final years, Blackberry lived in a small house where each wall was covered with photos of friends who had died. "I live to tell their stories," he said. "If I stay silent, who will?" In 2021, he died peacefully at the age of 76, not of AIDS, but the aftershocks of the disease had consumed him for half his life. When news of his death spread, many people cried. He was not a chart star, but to those who thanked him for his songs, he was the one who kept the flame alive. Blackberry is proof that sometimes courage is not about the spotlight. It's about being true when everyone wants you to be silent. And it's that courage that is his greatest legacy. 18. Carl Bean, the pastor who sings about the right to love. A pastor singing about gay pride in the 1970s. That was unthinkable. But Carl Bean did it with "I Was Born This Way," which sparked a debate between the church and the entertainment industry. As a gospel singer who recorded for Motown, Carl could have chosen a quieter path. Instead, he chose the truth. He chose love and paid the price with loneliness at the end of his life. Few people know that in his final years, he fought a quiet battle with HIV/AIDS, a truth that only those closest to him knew. Carl discovered he was HIV positive after being hospitalized for a mild heart attack. His doctor recommended a general test. When he learned of the diagnosis, he remained silent for days. A friend said that Carl only said one sentence: "I will not let this virus take away my singing, like it has taken away so many people I love." He then founded the Minority AIDS Project, an organization to support the LGBTQ+ community of color, and quietly spread the message of tolerance. He never publicly disclosed his health status, but people could see that he was weakening, his voice no longer as strong as before. Still, he preached every week, sometimes using the same songs he wrote about faith and the freedom to love. Carl died in 2021 at the age of 77. Some newspapers simply reported he passed away after a long illness. But those who heard him sing, who attended Unity Fellowship Church in Los Angeles, knew who he was, a man who sang not only about God, but also about compassion, acceptance, and the right to be true to himself. Carl Bean is proof that faith and homosexuality are not mutually exclusive, and that priests can be warriors of love, too. His story reminds us that no one is defined by a virus, by prejudice, or by fear, but by the love they leave behind. 17. Kenny Green, the angel who fell before he had a chance to live. He had a smile as gentle as the lyrics he wrote. Kenny Green was the soul of the R&B group Intro, one of the most beloved groups of the early 90s, with hits like Come Inside and Funny How Time Flies. Kenny was not only the lead singer, but also the talented producer and songwriter behind many hits for famous female singers. But in 2001, at the age of 32, Kenny passed away quietly. No farewell album, no lavish memorial. And what was even more shocking was that the truth about his illness only came to light in a sensational interview after his death. A close friend recalled the first time Kenny confided in his fears. He was working in a Manhattan recording studio when he suddenly passed out during a recording session. Everyone assumed it was due to a lack of sleep. But Kenny later said his heart was racing, his vision was blurry, and he felt like blood was in his chest. He hid it from everyone and went to the doctor to get a blood test. When the results came back, Kenny didn't come home for 3 days. He called his best friend and said, "I'm infected." In the only interview Kenny gave to Sister to Sister magazine before his death, he admitted that he was gay and living with HIV/AIDS. "I've lived a life that wasn't me," he said. "I've loved in the dark. Now I have to die in the light, because there's nothing to fear." But the confession was not well received. Many fans were shocked, and some record labels refused to reissue his old songs. When Kenny died, most of the media gave only brief coverage. No one mentioned the disease. No one talked about how he had saved the careers of many other singers. Some people thought that if Kenny had not come out as gay, his career could have been saved. But the price of silence, a lifetime of not living the truth. Kenny Green's story is a beautiful tragedy, a talented man, living in fear, dying courageously. He left behind music, but more importantly, he left behind an undeniable truth that those who dare to love, dare to speak, dare to live, always deserve to be remembered. 16. Jermaine Stewart, the man who dares to love without taking off his shirt. The song, "We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off to Have a Good Time," exploded on the charts in 1986. Jermaine Stewart not only brought a catchy song, but also conveyed a very different message: love does not mean lust. But behind that hit was a life full of darkness. Jermaine was a secretive gay artist, always avoiding the media, always keeping a certain distance from the world, until he suddenly died in 1997 at the age of 39 from liver cancer related to AIDS. But what shocked the public was not only the cause, but the way he quietly disappeared from life. A friend recalled that Jermaine was once kicked off a European tour because he was always tired and unfocused. But behind the exhaustion were a series of unusual signs: rapid weight loss, yellow skin, persistent dizziness. Jermaine knew his body was warning him, but he was afraid that if he went for a test, the name Jermaine Stewart would be associated with the most shameful disease of the time. He chose to quietly take traditional Chinese medicine, seek out folk healers, hoping for a miracle, when his illness worsened. Jermaine was secretly taken to a private hospital in Chicago by a close friend, but instead of telling his family, he asked to keep things private. A nurse at the hospital said, "I have never met anyone so brave and so lonely." Every night he sang softly, as if he was trying to save his voice for the world, even though no one was listening. When Jermaine died, the media went silent. A few lines of obituary, no explanation of the cause, no memorial service, no farewell from his peers, as if he had never existed, even though his music had been heard across America. Jermaine dared to love purely, but he did not dare to live truthfully because society was not ready. And that is what made his death more painful than the disease. 15. Bobby DeBarge, the ill-fated genius of the legendary musical family. In the DeBarge musical family, Bobby was the one with the melancholy beauty, the soaring voice, and the unmatched talent. As the lead singer of the band Switch, Bobby once captivated audiences with "There'll Never Be," but he was also the only member of that family to suffer the most tragic end death from AIDS in 1995 after years of struggling with addiction, incarceration, and a life lived in secret. What was even more shocking was how he discovered his illness in the most unlikely of places. Bobby was arrested for drug possession in the late 1980s and sent to federal prison. It was in prison that his health began to deteriorate. A fellow inmate said Bobby had frequent fevers, dry coughs, and even fainted after meals. When the prison doctor ordered a blood test, Bobby panicked. He knew he might have HIV, but he didn't dare believe it. The results came back positive, but Bobby received no counseling, no specialist, and no timely treatment. In his diary, Bobby wrote, "I didn't die of the virus. I died because no one thought I deserved to be cured." When he was released, Bobby was a shadow of his former self. He lived in a small apartment, away from the media. Many said he no longer had the strength to sing, but one day, at a family party, he broke into song, "I Call Your Name." The room stood still, one brother recalled. The voice was still there, but the spirit was gone. Bobby died in 1995 at the age of 39. His death was reported as complications from AIDS, but his family kept the details private. Fans knew only that Bobby had taken a break, but those who knew him knew that he had suffered a slow death not from the virus. but from the coldness of a system unwilling to reach out to someone like him. Bobby died in 1995 at the age of 39. His death was listed as complications from AIDS, but his family kept the details private. Fans only knew that Bobby was taking a break, but those who knew him knew that he suffered a slow death not from the virus, but from the coldness of a system that was unwilling to reach out to someone like him. Bobby was a light in the darkness for so many, but in the end, no one turned on the light for him, and that's what his music deserves to atone for by being remembered. 14. Sylvester, the Queen of Disco in a Man's Body. No one can forget the hit, "You Make Me Feel Mighty Real," a rousing declaration of freedom of the body and soul. Sylvester wasn't just a disco singer. She was the first queer icon in Black American culture, all the long skirts, red fingernails, and soaring falsetto. But in late 1987, as he was preparing to release a new album, he suddenly canceled all his shows. A close friend recalled that Sylvester was coughing up blood and had a high fever, but he refused to go to the hospital. "I have a lot to say," he said, "but if I go to the hospital now, I can't sing anymore." The story begins with a night in San Francisco while performing "Do You Want a Funk?" Sylvester suddenly staggered on stage. He collapsed, then stood up, smiled, and said, "My body is rebelling against the music," said an audience member. But it wasn't the music, it was the disease that was eating away at him every day. A nurse who knew him in the drag world confirmed that Sylvester had tested positive for HIV 6 months earlier, but he had asked to keep it a secret. He told me, "If I go public, I'm no longer an artist, I'll be called a patient." In late 1988, Sylvester died at his home in San Francisco. His body was placed in a white coffin, wearing his favorite purple robe and fur shawl. But many radio stations refused to play his music in the days that followed. Some churches refused to hold memorial services because he was a gay man who died of AIDS. No one wanted to talk about his death, but his fans remembered. They left hundreds of candles in front of the Castro Theater as a silent farewell. Sylvester was more than an artist. He was a cultural warrior, and even in death, he forced society to face its fears, fear of difference, fear of the unknown, but in every song, every dance move. He proved one thing: freedom is something no one can kill. You have accompanied us through 10 names, brilliant souls who were once covered by the darkness of HIV and discrimination. Thank you for not leaving them behind again. But here are 13 more jaw-dropping stories ahead, and we hope you're strong enough to follow them through. Ask yourself, if they weren't gay, would their deaths have been mourned more? 13. James Cleveland, the father of modern gospel and the secret of his last days. He was the father of modern gospel, founder of the Gospel Music Society of America, spiritual mentor to dozens of famous singers, from Aretha Franklin to Mahalia Jackson. James Cleveland transformed church music into a vital force throughout Black communities, but in his final years, he retreated from the stage. A few rumors began to swirl he had cancer. He was tired of old age, but no one dared to say it outright. He was HIV positive and dying of AIDS in silence. A former student recounted the time he discovered James was taking a strange drug. When asked, he smiled and said, "Sometimes faith is not strong enough to heal the body." Some church members discovered him secretly visiting an HIV clinic in South Central, but they kept quiet. If the rumors were true, the entire evangelical world would be shocked. A fellow pastor said, "Cleveland may have been gay, but we never asked and he never said." When he died in 1991, his family reported pulmonary complications. But a newspaper report later claimed he died of AIDS, and his adopted son filed a lawsuit, claiming he contracted the disease through unprotected sex. The lawsuit was a huge controversy, and the press explored it to its core. His name disappeared from many Black churches. His songs were stopped. His former colleagues remained silent. No one wanted to associate his gospel career with HIV, AIDS, and homosexuality. But his music lived on. He was the first person to take gospel music out of the old organ and turn it into a sound that lifts millions of people every Sunday. He inspired a generation of artists, and even though he lived in silence, he was a pioneer, a soul who loved God and maybe loved in a way that society would never allow. 12. Howard Rollins, TV face vanished in darkness. With his role in the Heat of the Night, Howard Rollins was one of the few black actors to land a starring role on a national television series in the 1980s. He was praised for his poise, his deep voice, and his piercing eyes. But when the series ended, Howard all but disappeared from Hollywood. No new contracts, no public appearances, only rumors he was addicted to drugs. He was arrested, he suffered from depression, and then, in 1996, he died at the age of 46. A former assistant who worked with him on set revealed Howard began to deteriorate noticeably after 1992. He avoided the cameras, often citing stomach aches or dizziness as an excuse to leave early. He was later hospitalized with a lung infection in his medical records. A doctor confirmed that he had advanced HIV/AIDS. But no one in the entertainment industry knew this. Howard demanded absolute secrecy. He feared being pushed out of the industry, feared that his name would be tarnished. When he died, the network announced that it was due to liver complications, but a doctor confirmed to the media that he was one of hundreds of black entertainers who died of AIDS and were never recognized. There was no public funeral, no colleagues spoke. Only a few close friends accompanied him to his final resting place. Howard had represented the image of the elegant black man on screen, but behind that was a person who was not allowed to acknowledge himself. And he left, taking it all with him: talent, silence, and an unspeakable loneliness. 11. Max Robinson, the broken-hearted newsreader. Max Robinson was the first black news anchor to appear regularly on national television in the United States. With his deep voice, calm demeanor, and bright eyes, he convinced millions that a more just future was on the horizon. But behind the neat suit was a man who was quietly falling apart. In the late 1980s, Max abruptly withdrew from the camera. At press conferences, he said he needed a break. But a backstage staffer said Max often had severe coughs and secretly took antiviral drugs. No one was allowed to know. He feared the truth would end everything he had worked so hard to build. In his final months, Max lived a low-key life in Washington, D.C., appearing only at a few small conferences. When he died in 1988 at age 49, his family reported the cause as acute pneumonia. But his former colleagues knew he had been HIV positive for years, and he lived in constant fear of being discovered as gay. The press was silent. Television stations held no memorials. Max Robinson once said, "I don't just want to read the news. I want to be believed." Ironically, trust is something he never dared to give himself, and that is the greatest sadness of a person who once represented the truth. 10. Gene Anthony Ray, the dancer who can't fall. Anyone who has seen Fame remembers Gene Anthony Ray, the black dancer who danced as if his heart was about to burst with passion. He was the first street star to shine on the Hollywood screen without going through professional training. But in the early 90s, Gene disappeared. No shows, no new roles. A former choreographer said that Gene was often late, sweating abnormally, and once collapsed in the middle of a rehearsal. They thought he was using illegal drugs. No one knew he was battling an unnamed disease. Gene discovered he was HIV positive after being hospitalized for acute hepatitis. He hid the results, didn't share with his mother, and didn't share with his co-stars. Only one close friend revealed he was afraid, not afraid of dying, but afraid of people looking down on him for being gay with AIDS. Gene died in 2003 at the age of 41. His picture was blurred in some newspapers, but no one called out the disease that took him by its name. Some in the industry still say that Gene destroyed himself, but they don't know that he fought quietly to keep some remnants of his glory in a body that no longer obeyed. Gene symbolized the most honest, wild, passionate things about black art. But he was also a bitter proof that art is not enough to save a person if society does not allow them to be themselves. 9. Alvin Ailey, choreographer of Forgotten Souls. Alvin Ailey transformed black suffering into the language of movement. His dances, such as Revelations, became global symbols of African American history and aspiration. But as he entered his 50s, Alvin became increasingly exhausted. He canceled tours and avoided interviews. He once had a nosebleed in the middle of a rehearsal, but he refused to go to the hospital, one dancer recalled. He said, "I can't be seen as weak." Alvin discovered he was HIV positive in the late 1980s, but fearing public humiliation, he asked his doctors and friends to keep it a secret. When he died in 1989, the cause was given as an unspecified terminal illness. His doctor later acknowledged that Alvin had asked that AIDS not be listed in his medical records. There was no large funeral. There was no public farewell. Only young dancers quietly danced to wade in the water as a farewell ritual. Alvin once said, "I just want to tell our stories with every flip of the hand, every tap of the foot." And now, his own life is a story that is hidden because of fear, because of prejudice, because of a society that has never allowed someone like him to die with truth. 8. Billy Wright, the man who fired the fire, but no one remembered his name. Billy Wright was once known as the godfather of rock and roll, with his curly hair, heavy makeup, and feminine performance style. He was a phenomenon on the R&B stage in the 1950s, but it was his daring to be real that made him marginalized in an era where masculinity was the standard of survival. Few people know that Billy was the one who inspired Little Richard, from his singing style to his appearance to his stage style. But when HIV/AIDS began to destroy his body in his later years, no record label cared. He languished quietly in his small apartment, never performed again, and no one asked about him, said a neighbor. In 1991, Billy died of AIDS-related complications, largely forgotten. There was no big memorial. No one reissued his music. His death was a clear example of how society will applaud when you entertain them, but will be silent when you need to be loved. 7. Eazy-E, the gangsta king who died in a white hospital. Eazy-E was once an icon of street hip-hop, the founder of NWA and the father of gangsta rap. But in early 1995, when he was hospitalized for a persistent cough, no one expected the end. The diagnosis terminal, AIDS. When Eazy announced that he was HIV positive, many were skeptical. Some thought he had been poisoned. Eazy never said he was gay, recalled one former bandmate. But people whispered. They didn't want to believe that a street legend had died of the gay disease. He died just weeks later, at the age of 31. The media reported the news quickly, and fans were shocked and silent. But no one spoke of the loneliness in the white hospital room where the rap king died amid ventilators. Eazy's death was not just the end of a legend, it was the beginning of a question. Who has the right to die in the truth? 6. Fela Kuti, the Horn of Freedom and the Suppressed Death. Fela Kuti was a Nigerian musician, political activist, father of Afrobeat, and a voice of resistance to tyranny for decades. He was arrested more than 200 times, exposed corruption through his music, but towards the end of his life, as his health deteriorated, he no longer appeared on stage. In 1997, his brother, Dr. Olukoya Ransom Kuti, announced that Fela had died of AIDS. The whole country was shocked. Many denied it. One student said people didn't want to believe it. A fighter like Fela died of that disease. But the truth is the truth. He lived among dozens of wives, amid cigarette smoke and protests. No one knows exactly when he contracted the disease. But what is certain is that he never received proper treatment. Fela Kuti once screamed for justice, but died in silence, like the people he sang for. That silence made his death not just a pain, but a terrifying oblivion. 5. Gil Scott-Heron, the last storyteller no one listens to. Gil Scott-Heron was the voice of protest for a generation of Black Americans, who planted the revolution will not be televised in the public mind as a poetic wake-up call. But as his heyday passed, he sank into drug addiction, was arrested for possession of illegal drugs, and then all but disappeared from the musical scene. Those close to him said that Gil was often tired, short of breath, and coughing up blood. but refused to go to the hospital. It was only when he was hospitalized for the last time in 2011 that the public learned that he had contracted HIV years ago. A doctor revealed he knew, but he didn't want to be labeled an artist with AIDS. When he died, the media avoided mentioning the disease, but for those who listened to Gil's songs, they understood he died not just of a virus, but of a system that never forgave weakness. In an era of silence, he still tried to speak, and that is the deepest tragedy. 4. Ronnie Dyson, the voice that time forgot. Ronnie Dyson once brought Broadway audiences to their feet with Hair and rocked the charts with If You Let Me Make Love to You, Then Why Can't I Touch You? But by the early 1990s, he disappeared from television and stopped touring. A colleague revealed that Ronnie once turned down a major tour because of unexplained persistent fatigue. A few months later, he was hospitalized for severe immunodeficiency and never returned. The family did not disclose the cause, but a nurse who cared for Ronnie confirmed that he had been infected with HIV for many years but had never received proper treatment. When he died in 1990, there was no public funeral. No one ever mentioned the voice that had melted so many hearts. Ronnie died in silence, like so many other black gay men of his time, erased from memory to avoid the uncomfortable question, why didn't we speak up when they were alive? 3. Keith Washington, the silent lover of a brief time. Keith Washington was a rising star in the early 90s, expected to become the new Luther Vandross. But after the hit Kissing You, he suddenly withdrew from the spotlight. Fans speculated Keith was tired of being famous, and Keith had family problems. But a close friend said he started coughing badly, lost weight, and withdrew from everyone. In 1993, Keith died at the age of 33. His family did not disclose the cause, only saying that he had a long-term illness. But in his medical records, the cause of death was AIDS. No one in the industry publicly mourned him. Keith's voice was quietly forgotten, as if it had never existed. A friend once wrote, "If he had lived his life, he would have lost his fans. But in silence, he lost his whole life, a short death, but left behind an endless question." 2. Michael Jeter, the lonely clown in the middle of a bright stage. Michael Jeter was a talented singer and one of Hollywood's best supporting actors with charming humor, gentle eyes, and subtle acting ability in The Green Mile, Evening Shade, and Sesame Street. But behind the lights, he was a quiet, shy person, hiding many fears. In the late 1990s, Jeter abruptly canceled a series of shows. He would have a bad cough, he would get weak, but he would always say it was just allergies, recalled a co-star. In 2003, Michael died at the age of 50. The news said the cause was complications from epilepsy. But in multiple medical reports, doctors confirmed that he had been living with HIV for more than a decade. He once told a relative, "I don't want the world to see me differently. I just want to laugh on stage until the end." And he did. But he also exemplified a painful truth: some people are so good at hiding their pain that they don't even know they need to be hugged. 1. Tony Washington, a soaring voice crushed by prejudice. Tony Washington was the soul of the R&B group The Dynamic Superiors, a group that rose to prominence in the mid-1970s with a daring performance style. As one of the few black male singers who dared to openly admit his homosexuality at the time, Tony not only sang with a soulful tenor voice, but also performed in women's dresses, high heels, and with a confidence that defied all prejudices. But behind the lights, Tony lived in a long period of loneliness. A friend in the group said that he was often tired, lost his voice, and had a dry cough, but still tried to perform. When he learned that he was HIV positive, Tony chose to withdraw from the stage without telling anyone. He died quietly in the late 1980s, without a single mention in the press. His career was buried by prejudice about gender and social diseases. But for those who heard his voice, who saw him stand on stage without bowing, they still remember Tony Washington lived as a short but brilliant star. They once touched a generation with their voices, but were abandoned when they needed a hand to hold. Today, We do not tell them to stir up sadness, but to give them back what they deserve, a word of gratitude, a moment of silence, and a ray of hope that sympathy will make the world a better tomorrow. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the voices that were once forgotten. If their stories touch your heart, please share this video as an act of kindness. Leave a comment to remember them, the souls who were once hidden but today are called by name with respect.